In the Wild West, where the wind cuts through the prairie and memories have yet to rest, a lonely man lives on a quiet farm, never believing he needs a woman in his life. Until the day she steps off the train with tears in her eyes and brings with her a past that silences the land. If it were you, would you dare to open your heart to someone who holds so many secrets? Or would you close your heart, letting the past sleep, even if it knocks on the door again? Because sometimes love doesn't come to fill the void, but to reopen wounds that we thought had healed, and sometimes choosing to love again is the bravest choice in life. If you've ever lost something, if your heart has ever been silent for fear of being hurt, this story will make you remember that no one is ever truly lost. They just haven't found where they belong. Please join me on the journey of Jonas Whitaker and Clara Monroe, two lonely souls finding themselves in the middle of a sandstorm in the West. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts to listen to this heart-touching story together. The wind blew across the Montana plateau, carrying the smell of hay and the distant clang of steel. The town of Sage Hollow nestled in a valley with only one main road leading to a small train station. On late afternoons like today, the entire town held its breath, waiting for the train whistle to echo across the horizon. Jonas Whitaker pulled his cap down lower and squinted toward the west. The afternoon sun shone on his tanned face and the deep lines around his eyes. He had not come to the station for love, nor for marriage. He had only to pick up the pine logs he had ordered several weeks ago for the repair of the stables. The 48-year-old widower had lived alone on the barren land for 10 years. He had grown accustomed to the silence that included the old horse's heartbeat, the wind whistling through the stables, and his own chatter as the sun set. As the train from the east blew its long whistle, white steam billowing out like the breath of an iron monster. Jonas frowned slightly. The train was more crowded than usual. There were women in long dresses, carrying old suitcases, a few young men in black hats, their eyes wandering, looking for someone. A woman stood at the end of the train, her ash-gray dress not new but clean. The wind blew gently, making her dark brown hair escape from its bun and fall across her forehead. She held a small tin box to her chest, her eyes lost, like someone who had just missed her flight. Jonas didn't pay any attention until she came toward him. "Are you Mr. Whitaker?" Her voice was soft, a little shaky. Jonas frowned slightly. "Yes, but I think you have the wrong person. I am not bidding on any bride." The woman paused. The train screeched behind her and rolled out of the station. For a moment, she just stood there, clutching the tin can, watching the train disappear. A tear rolled slowly down her cheek, reflecting the crimson sunset. She wiped it away quickly, but Jonas saw he had intended to turn away. His business was nothing more than the lumber yard. But his steps suddenly slowed. Years of loneliness had made him indifferent to the sadness of others. But that tear made him feel a pang as if he had just seen himself 10 years ago, the afternoon he lost his wife and small child. "Do you have relatives here?" he asked hoarsely. The woman shook her head, looking down at her dusty boots. "No, all I have is this letter. The writer promised to meet me at the station, but perhaps there was a mistake." She opened the letter, the edges frayed, the scrawled signature, Mr. Whitaker, Sage Hollow, Montana Territory. Jonas was silent for a moment, then sighed. Maybe someone had teased her, or some other Whitaker living far away. Either way, she had nowhere else to go when the sun was about to set. "The inn is 3 miles away," he said. "It's getting dark, and you won't be able to walk in the cold wind. I have a spare room at the farmhouse. Stay here for the night, and tomorrow I'll help you find someone to write your letter." The woman looked at him for a long time, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "I don't want to cause trouble. I don't mind. I just don't want to see anyone freezing to death in the middle of the field." She nodded slightly, her voice small as the wind. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I'm Clara Monroe." Her name rang out, plain, evoking something distant and sad. They followed the dusty road toward the ranch. Dusk was spreading over the distant mountains, turning the snow on their peaks a pale orange. Jonas's horse walked slowly, pulling a wooden cart loaded with a few sacks of feed in her small trunk. No one said anything. The sound of horse hooves mixed with the sound of dry wind rustling through the cactus bushes. When the oil lamp in the house appeared, Clara whispered, "So beautiful, so peaceful." Jonas replied dryly, "Peace often comes with loneliness." Inside, she was struck by the simplicity of the house wooden walls, a small fireplace, a few rough chairs and a table. On the shelf was an old, dusty picture frame. Jonas was about to put it away, but Clara saw it, a picture of a young woman holding a newborn baby. "My wife," he said curtly. "She died a long time ago." Clara just nodded slightly. She didn't ask further. That night, while he lit the fire in the fireplace, she sat by the window, looking out at the vast sky. Steam condensated on the glass. Somewhere, a dog howled long and long, mingling with the wind. Jonas poured her a cup of tea, his hands rough from work. "I'll take you to the post office tomorrow. Maybe they know who sent the letter." "Thank you," Clara replied softly. He nodded, sitting back by the fireplace. The firelight reflected off her face, her brown eyes showing exhaustion, but also something else, a stubborn endurance. Jonas watched her through the smoke of his tea, suddenly realizing that the silence in the house was no longer as empty as before. Perhaps it was because of her soft breathing mixed with the sound of the wind outside. As she stood up to go to her room, he said, "Clara." She turned back. "If no one wants you tomorrow, you can stay here for a few more days. I need someone to help clean out the barn." She smiled faintly. "I won't take credit. Don't call it a quid pro quo." Their gazes met in silence, longer than either of them had intended. Outside, the first moon had just risen above the mountains, casting its silvery light across the sandy courtyard. Something stirred inside Jonas, a small quiver of a long-lost string. He didn't know who she was or what tomorrow would bring, but the tear at the station was still in his mind like a faint, unquenchable light. That night, a cold wind blew through the cracks in the door, making the fire in the fireplace sway. Jonas could not sleep. He heard the wind whistling on the porch, then her soft footsteps in the next room. The cabin, accustomed to solitude, had a different breath, and he realized perhaps silence could tell a story, if only someone would listen. The first morning at the Whitaker ranch began with the smell of smoke and the sound of wind through the cracks in the walls. The night before's snow had covered the porch in a thin layer of powder. The early morning light, blue-gray, shone through the small window and shimmered on the worn wooden floorboards marked by men's shoes. Clara Monroe opened her eyes and took a slow breath. The room was small but clean. There was a single bed covered with a woolen blanket, an old wooden table with a Bible on it. In the corner, A dim mirror reflected her face, pale from the long train ride. She smoothed her hair, carefully folded the blanket out of habit, and opened the door. Outside, Jonas Whitaker was rekindling the fire. His cotton shirt was rolled up to his elbows, his veins dark from the sun. He said nothing, only nodded when she came out. "Good morning," she said softly. "Coffee's ready. I have some toast. Nothing fancy. I don't need fancy." She smiled slightly, enough to erase the coldness in the house. Jonas was silent for a moment. It had been a long time since he had heard a woman's voice in the morning. It made the room, which was used only to the sound of wind, suddenly beat with a different rhythm. They ate at the wooden table in a comfortable silence. Clara looked around and noticed that everything was neat, though old. On the shelf, coils of reins hung neatly, next to a dusty harmonica. "Did you play Jonas?" curled his lips. "It's been a long time. Nobody listens anymore. Maybe I should play again. Music keeps the house from getting cold. This house is used to being cold." The answer was dry, but not harsh. She did not reply, just gently touched the coffee cup, watching the steam rise like mist. At noon, Jonas took the horse out to the fields. Clara, wearing an old apron, washed the dishes and swept the house. When she drew the curtains, dust rose like a fine mist. On the windowsill was a small leather shoe, a child's with a torn heel. She picked it up, her heart sinking. Jonas returned and found her standing by the window, holding the shoe in her hand. He paused. A long moment passed between them, a silence that needed no explanation. He said only, "That boy is my son." She gently put the shoe back. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It's okay. I'm just not used to people touching memories." They sat down, not looking at each other. The wind from the porch whistled through the chimney, making the fire in the fireplace sway. "You kept a lot of their things," Clara said softly, "because I had nothing else to keep." A simple sentence, but contains a lifetime of loneliness. As evening fell, Jonas went to the stables. Clara followed him, carrying an oil lamp. She wanted to help, even though her borrowed boots were too big for her. "No need," he said. "You're a guest. There are no guests here. There are only people trying to find work to forget themselves." He turned to look at her. In the lamplight, her face was calm yet resilient, as if she had weathered more storms than he thought. She helped him feed the horses and spread hay. A brown mare came up and nuzzled her hand. Clara stroked its mane. She is as gentle as her master. Jonas smiled a rare smile that softened his face. "Don't tell anyone you said that." "I don't know anyone to tell." They both laughed. A small but real laugh. That evening, Clara cooked her first meal, green bean stew and cornbread. She cooked it skillfully, and the aroma filled the house. Jonas ate slowly, marveling at the simple flavors he had long forgotten. "Where did you learn to cook so well? I used to teach in Kansas. The school kitchen is where I survived the naughtiest kids." "Teaching. Why did you quit?" She looked up, her eyes sad. War and what it left behind. Then she changed her tone. "I want to go far away, where no one knows me." Jonas nodded, not asking any more questions. He knew the feeling. He too had left everything in the South and come to the mountains to escape his past. When they finished washing the dishes, Jonas took his coat out onto the porch. The cool wind stirred his hair. Clara stood inside, watching. "Does it ever strike you?" she said softly. That silence is sometimes louder than any noise. Jonas turned, half laughing, half thinking. "Yes, but it is the only thing that does not betray." She nodded slightly, then said, "I used to be afraid of silence. Now I am not. It is where I can hear my heart most clearly." The silence that followed the words was long. The wind whistled through the fields, and horses whinnied in the distance. Jonas looked at the woman standing in the lamplight. Her shadow stretched across the wooden floor. He didn't know why, but he sensed that she was carrying a familiar pain like his. At night, when Clara had gone to her room, Jonas was still sitting before the fire. He took out from the old drawer the letter his sister had sent him last year, the letter that had reminded him to try to open his heart to life again. He smiled faintly and threw the letter into the fire, but the fire could not burn away the image of the strange woman with the tin box and the tear yesterday. Just one night, he muttered to himself. She'll leave tomorrow, but deep down, there was a part of him that wasn't sure he wanted that. In the next room, Clara sat before the window, the tin box open. Inside was a photo of a boy about 6 years old and a scorched letter, the words, "I will wait for you in the promised land." She stroked the photo gently, tears rolling down without making a sound. In the distance, the harmonica sounded slow, halting. Jonas was rehearsing the same melody. She listened, each note touching a hidden wound. A feeling rose inside her that was both comforting and frightening. Comforting because she was no longer alone, and frightening because she was afraid of being lost again. The oil lamp cast a yellow light on the wooden wall. Outside, snow fell silently, covering every footprint. She wondered, perhaps it was not a mistake that fate had brought her here. Perhaps this place, with that taciturn man, was the final stop she had prayed for. She whispered in the darkness, "Thank you, God, for giving me a roof over my head, even if only for one more night." 3 days had passed since that first morning. The November wind had grown colder with each passing day, as if Montana were preparing for a long winter. Clara Monroe was used to the small jobs on the ranch, boiling water, building fires, spreading hay, cleaning the stables. She worked tirelessly, always gently and thoughtfully. Jonas Whitaker didn't say a word of praise, but the way he led her into his private world was a rare act of trust. This morning, they had to go down to Sage Hollow. Jonas needed to buy saltpeter for the cows, and Clara wanted to find a clue about the letter that had brought her here. When he asked if she could come with him, she looked at him hesitantly. "If you don't mind, no. I think you should see the world beyond this hill." She smiled slightly. "I have seen too many worlds, but there is no place for me to stand." He did not reply, but in his heart, he knew, sometimes people do not need many words, just need a path to walk together. They rode side by side down the valley. The snow had melted, revealing wet, red earth. The town of Sage Hollow came into view. Just a few wooden houses, a tavern, a general store, a small chapel, and a post office. Blue smoke rose from chimneys, blending with the silver-gray sky. As Jonas led the horse to the post in front of the store, Clara felt the eyes of the passers-by. No noise, no clear words, just stares, cold as the wind. The grocery store door opened, and Eli Harper, the owner, came out with a wry smile. "Jonas Whitaker. Long time no see. You don't seem to like being alone anymore." "Huh," Jonas frowned. "I just came to pick up my order." "Don't say that. Eli." Harper sneered. "I'm just telling the truth. Did you get this girl by train?" Clara stood still, not reacting. The wind blew her skirt slightly. In her brown eyes There was not anger but an inexplicable calm. "Yes, I come from the east," she replied softly, her voice soft as silk but loud enough for all to hear. "But I am not a commodity to be talked about." The answer made several men standing near the horse post turn. Harper shrugged, feigning a smile. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Miss, small town. Everyone's a little curious." Jonas slammed the list on the counter. Curiosity should be kept to a level that doesn't embarrass others. The atmosphere in the shop froze. Then Harper smiled wryly and pretended to be busy wrapping the items. Clara touched Jonas's arm lightly. "It's okay. I'm used to it." Jonas turned to her, his voice low. "No, you shouldn't be, but I have to. Everywhere I go." He was silent, watching her walk out with her small bag. Through the window, he saw her silhouette standing by the roadside, holding her hat in the wind, her loneliness making him feel a pang. On Main Street, they stopped at Carter's Diner. The owner, Ruth Carter, a woman about Jonas's age with prematurely gray hair, greeted them with a warm smile. "Jonas, surprise. Who are you bringing here?" "A companion for a few days," he replied shortly. "Well, companions need to eat. Please sit down. I have apple pie baked fresh this morning." Clara thanked him, her voice soft but sincere. When Ruth brought out the cake, she said softly enough for her to hear, "Don't let their words hurt you. They only fear what they don't understand." Clara looked up, her eyes meeting the woman's sympathetic gaze, and for the first time she smiled fully. "Thank you. I will remember that." Jonas sat opposite, watching the scene in silence. He knew that Ruth, who had lost her husband in the war, was one of the few people left with a kind heart in this harsh land. He felt a sudden relief that Clara was not completely alone. After lunch, they went to the town post office. The manager, old and slow, looked through the mail-in list and shook his head. "There is no Whitaker for Miss Monroe, ma'am. Probably sent to the wrong area." Clara took the old letter back. A look of sadness crossed her face. "Thank you." The wind picked up outside the post office. "Maybe we should go back," Jonas said. "It's going to snow." "Yes." She nodded. "I have no one else to look for anyway." The words were soft, but they echoed in Jonas's heart like the sound of a hammer on stone. He tightened his grip on the reins, his eyes fixed on the ground, trying to hide the emotion he did not want to admit. On the way back, they passed the little chapel. The bells echoed in the valley. At the gate, Pastor Amos Reed was hanging the first winter laurel wreath. When he saw Jonas, he smiled kindly. "Jonas, you have finally come out of the cowshed, and this must be your new friend." Jonas nodded. "Clara Monroe, Reverend." Amos shook her hand, his voice warm. "Welcome to Sage Hollow. Here, we value people more than rumors." Clara smiled luckily. "I needed a place like that." Amos smiled gently. "God often puts people where they need to be, even in strange ways." Jonas looked at the old priest, remembering the same thing he had said after his wife's funeral. He hadn't believed it then. Now, hearing it again, he felt a stirring in his heart. It was dusk when they left town. The sky was amber. The wind carried the smell of stove smoke mixed with the scent of the first snow. In the carriage, Clara sat still, looking away. Jonas glanced at her. They spoke badly. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I got used to that look, but no one should get used to injustice." She turned to him and said softly, "Have you ever lost something that made you stop fighting?" "Yes, my wife and child. After that, I fought with nothing. And yet you're still here, still alive. Maybe you're stronger than you think." The words left Jonas speechless. He just nodded, his hands on the reins. It was dark when they reached the ranch. Jonas helped her out of the car, the yellow light illuminating their faces. She turned to him, her voice small but firm. "Thank you, Jonas, for not leaving me at the station, and today, for standing up when people looked down on me." He looked deep into her eyes, where the firelight reflected from the window. "You don't need anyone to protect you. Clara, you're strong enough to stand on your own. Maybe, but today, I feel comforted by having someone by my side." Jonas nodded slightly, saying nothing more. But in his heart, he knew, from that moment, that woman had entered a part of his life that he thought no one else could touch. Outside, the snow began to fall lightly. A light shone on a wooden house in the middle of the wilderness. In its light, two people, both with old wounds, but feeling warmth for the first time as they shared a simple dinner together. As night fell, the wind beat against the walls, mingling with the soft breathing of the horses outside the stable. Jonas looked out the window and saw Clara's silhouette as she placed the kettle on the stove. Her figure leaning in the firelight, as calm as if she had always belonged here. And he understood that the town's prejudice, and his own prejudice, was slowly melting away, piece by piece, like ice on the eaves when spring comes. The early winter wind swept through Sage Hollow, blowing the dry birch leaves to crispness and bringing with it a biting cold. The wild geese had flown south, leaving the sky empty and vast like the loneliness of the frontier. Jonas Whitaker pulled his sheepskin coat tight as he stepped out into the yard. His breath billowed in white smoke. From inside the house came the smell of cornbread. Clara Monroe was baking the first batch of the winter. Beside the stove, she rolled up her sleeves, tied her brown hair back, and her face was flushed from the heat from the fire. The light coming through the window illuminated her figure, making the once empty house suddenly come alive. Jonas stood still for a moment, watching the scene through the window. He wondered since when the image of the woman in the small kitchen had made his heart so still. "Would you like some honey?" Clara's voice behind him startled him. He nodded. "If you want some, sure. I keep it in a mason jar under the cupboard." Jonas frowned. Surprised? "How did you know?" She laughed. "I cleaned your house. No secrets survived dust." He chuckled. The first laugh in years. Breakfast was simple cornflakes, black coffee, and a few slices of bacon. But the atmosphere was different. Clara told stories about the children she had taught in Kansas, the one who liked to put frogs in desk drawers, the one who drew suns in chalk on the blackboard. Jonas listened, smiling occasionally. "Have you ever thought about teaching children to ride horses?" she asked. "No. Here, children only learn to survive. But if no one teaches them good, they will only learn to be stronger than others." That left him silent for a long time. She continued. "They say the West was built by men. I think it was held together by the kindness of the women they lost." Jonas looked up, his eyes lingering on those deep brown eyes. She didn't say much, but every word carried weight. That afternoon, the snowstorm arrived earlier than expected. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains, and the wind howled through the valleys like a wild beast. Jonas checked the stables, secured the doors, and went back into the house. Clara had stoked the firewood and set out a woolen blanket by the chair. "I heard the wind change this morning," she said. "Have you got enough feed for the cows, enough for 3 days? But I'm worried about the new calf. It's weak. You can't leave it alone." "I know." He put on his coat, but Clara stopped him. "You can't go out now. The wind is too strong." He shook his head slightly. "If I don't go, it will die. In this part of the world, you can't choose between what's easy and what's right." She looked at him for a moment, then took the scarf and wrapped it around his neck. "At least keep warm." Jonas went outside, the wind stinging his face. The snow was falling thickly, and only the light of the house lamps could be seen through the white mist. The calf lay huddled against the wall of the stall, breathing weakly. He bent down, pulled it into a corner of dry straw, and covered it with a blanket. A small figure appeared in the doorway, Clara clutching another blanket, her robe soaked. "What are you doing here?" he shouted softly, his voice tinged with concern. "I brought more blankets. I can't stay in the house knowing you're alone." The wind whistled through the cracks in the planks, and snow covered their shoulders. Jonas looked at her. Her hair was wet, her lips were blue, but her eyes were burning. He said nothing, but held the blanket and helped her cover the calf. After a few minutes, the animal stirred slightly, its breathing more even. Clara breathed out softly. "It will live." Jonas nodded, looking out into the storm. "Thank you. You don't need to thank me. I only did what I thought was right." They were silent. The wind died down. The snow fell more quietly. In the silence of the winter night, amid the smell of damp straw and the breath of horses, the two men stood side by side, listening to their hearts beat in time with the quiet rhythm of the mountains and forest. When they returned home, they were soaked. Clara shivered slightly with cold. Jonas rekindled the fire and handed her a cup of hot tea. "You shouldn't have risked it, neither can I," she replied, smiling slightly. After a while, as the warmth of the room began to spread, Clara said softly, "In Kansas, I once rescued a baby in the snow, but it didn't survive. Ever since then, I've been afraid of winter storms, afraid of feeling helpless." Jonas looked at her. "And tonight, I'm not afraid tonight. Maybe because I'm not alone." He tried to say something, but his throat tightened. Only the crackling fire in the fireplace reflected in their eyes. The next day, the sky was clear. The valley was a pure white blanket. Jonas went out to check the stable. The calf was still alive. He returned and found Clara cutting wood for a fire. "You don't need to work so hard," she replied without looking up. "Working makes me feel alive." He looked at her, the morning light shining on her cheeks, making him realize this woman was not as weak as he had thought. She was strong, like the wind quiet, but unstoppable. In the afternoon, he was mending the fence in the field. She brought him some bread and coffee. They sat down on a rock to rest, overlooking the white valley. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place?" she asked. "Yes. But then you don't. It's lonely here, but at least I understand what it's like to be lonely. And in crowded places, people are lonely in a louder way." She smiled softly, the wind blowing a few strands of hair around her face. He looked, then turned away. A feeling both strange and familiar arose in his heart, like a small sprout emerging from a layer of snow. That evening they ate dinner in a comfortable silence. Clara read a short passage from the Bible, her voice warm and steady. Jonas listened, feeling as if her voice filled the voids in his heart, voids that had been there for too long. As she closed the book, he said, Do you believe God sent you here? Maybe, but I think sometimes God uses the loneliness of two people to mend a torn world. That sentence made him silent for a long time. He did not dare to look at her, for fear that he would say something wrong. That night, Jonas went out on the porch and looked at the snow, which was shining faintly in the moonlight. He heard the door open softly. Clara stood there, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose, couldn't sleep. No, I dreamed of the train. Do you miss home? She shook her head. No, I just miss what I lost. Jonas turned to look at her, the moonlight illuminating his gentle yet strong face. We all lose something. Clara, but if we keep looking at the loss, we forget the way back. She nodded slightly, her eyes looking up at the starry sky. So do you think? Is there a way out of sadness? No, only through it. The two stood side by side, saying nothing more. The wind was cold, but between them, a nameless warmth was burning, a warmth that did not come from fire, but from understanding and being understood. The snow was falling again, not as fiercely as the last storm, but quietly and persistently. Sage Hollow seemed to be covered in a blanket of endless white. Jonas Whitaker was used to long winter days, but this year the silence was different. It was no longer loneliness, but something deeper, and he wondered as he watched the fire cast shadows of the two of them against the wood paneling. Clara Monroe sat by the window, mending a torn handkerchief. She worked carefully, slowly, as if each needlepoint could soothe the past. Occasionally, she paused to look at the falling snow on the porch, her brown eyes sad and distant. Jonas knew there were things in those eyes she had not told. The wind was howling harder than usual tonight. He went to the stables to check, then returned, brushing the snow from his shoulders. Clara greeted him with a cup of hot tea, steam rising like mist. Is it cold outside? Yes, but not as cold as it used to be. He sat down in a chair, took off his gloves, and stared absently at the fire. When my wife died, the house was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. It was the scariest sound in my life. She placed the cup of tea before him, her voice as light as the wind. Silence is sometimes worse than death. The words made Jonas look up. For the first time, he saw in her eyes a pain deeper than sadness. Not the pain of someone who had just lost someone, but the pain of someone who had carried a loss with her for a lifetime. Late that night, the wind blew so hard that the windows rattled. Jonas woke with a start at a strange noise. A faint sobbing sound came from the next room. He put on his coat and walked softly towards it. A dim light came from the crack in the door, and he could hear the sobbing. He didn't mean to interrupt, but his heart urged him on. Jonas knocked. "Clara, are you okay?" There was silence inside. Then her voice, trembling slightly. "It's okay. It was just, I had a dream, a nightmare." She didn't answer. After a few seconds, he said, "Any dream that makes you cry is worth telling." The door opened. She stood there, her hair tangled, her eyes red. "I don't want your pity. I don't know what pity is. All I know is that I'm afraid of seeing someone as lonely as I was." She turned away slightly and took the tin box from the table. The lid swung open, revealing the familiar contents, a photograph of the boy and some old letters. Jonas noticed, but said nothing. She pulled out a letter and opened it with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed and torn at the edges. "I kept it for 4 years," she said softly, "because it was the last thing I had." "Your husband's," she nodded. "Yes, but he didn't write it." Jonas frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Clara pursed her lips. "All I know is that the handwriting isn't his, and there's something in the letter I've never understood." She handed over the paper. Jonas looked at the faded writing. "If they find out what we're doing in New Orleans, they'll hang us. Take the child and don't come back." He looked up, his eyes lingering on her face. "Who do you think wrote it? I don't know, but I believe the writer wants me gone." The air in the room grew heavy. Jonas put the paper down on the table and was silent for a long time. He knew what it felt like to live with unanswered questions, with only vague beliefs and wounds that would never heal. "Can you tell me what happened?" Clara sat down, looking at the fire as if searching for courage. "I was a school teacher. My husband, Thomas, was a doctor back east. We lived peacefully until he was convicted of helping colored people escape from the camps. They said he betrayed the law. I believed he was innocent, but..." She paused, her voice choking. "He was shot. I ran away, taking my son with me, but he died on the way. These are all I have left." Jonas clasped his hands on his knees. He didn't know what to say. All the comforting words were lost in the face of real pain. He simply asked, "You came here because of that fake letter?" "Yes. Maybe I want to believe that someone still remembers me, or at least has somewhere to go." He nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "Maybe God wasn't wrong in sending you here, not to find anyone, but to stop you from running." She looked at him, surprised by his words. Jonas was not a man of gentle words, but in his voice she heard something truer than any prayer. Outside, the wind and snow howled across the fields. Inside, two people sat facing each other, watching the flickering fire, listening to the silence that did not feel empty. After a while, Jonas stood up. "You should rest. Tomorrow I'll go out to the woods and get some wood. There's going to be another storm. Aren't you afraid of this winter?" He chuckled. "I've lived through 10 of them, but this is the first one I'm not afraid of the snow." She bowed her head and softly replied, "Thank you for listening to me, Jonas." He just nodded slightly. "Thank you for telling me." When she returned to her room, he sat alone, holding the letter in his hand. The ink was smudged in places, probably from tears. He watched the words New Orleans repeat in his mind, a place far away, but perhaps carrying her answer. He didn't know why he cared so much, but he knew from tonight on. Clara's story was no longer her own. Outside, a snowstorm had begun. The wind whistled through the roofs, and the howling sounded like human voices in the night. Jonas looked at the fire, and a strange feeling crept into his heart in the coldest of winters. He felt himself growing warmer. That morning, the sky was as gray as a leaden blanket. Thick clouds rolled down from the Bitterroot Mountains, weighing down on the small place called Sage Hollow. Jonas Whitaker had seen many snowstorms in his life, but when he saw that cloud, he knew this would be the worst of the season. He was loading the last bundles of firewood into the shed when Clara Monroe emerged from the house, a shawl around her neck. The wind whipped her skirts, but she remained calm. "Is it a big storm?" she asked. "Yes. We might have to close for 2 days. Then we should get some water and firewood." Jonas nodded. She said I and he realized, for the first time in years, that he had not heard himself use the word I. They worked until noon. The wind was howling, and the first snowflakes whipped past their faces. Jonas gathered the horses into the stable and led the calf into a corner. When he came out, it was almost foggy. Clara was tying up the window, her wet hair sticking to her cheek. "Come in, Clara." The back door's still open. He rushed forward and grabbed her hand. "It's not worth it. It's too windy." But just then, the door burst open, and a swirl of snow rushed in, knocking them both to the floor. Jonas grabbed her, pulled her inside, and slammed the latch. Their breaths mingled in the cold smoke, so close he could hear her heart pounding. They took shelter in the stable, where he had prepared a kerosene lamp and some blankets. Outside, the snow pounded on the roof, and the wind howled like a human cry. Clara shivered slightly, and Jonas quickly pulled another blanket over her. "You'll be cold," she whispered. "I'm used to it, but I don't want to owe more." Jonas looked at her, the lamplight illuminating his brown eyes. "In the middle of a storm, no one owes anyone. We just survived together." They were silent for a long time. The wind beat against the walls. The horses neighed uneasily. Jonas poured some corn wine from a leather flask and handed it to her. "Drink some. It's warmer." Clara accepted it and took a small sip. The spicy taste spread in her throat, chasing away the cold. "In Kansas," she said. "I once got stuck in the snow with a little student. We waited for 3 days. She lived, but her father, who arrived late, died on the way." Her voice dropped. "I never told you about it, because everyone says I should be grateful, but I only feel guilty." Jonas listened, his eyes fixed on her. "You can't blame yourself for the storm." "Maybe," she replied, "but people always think they can save someone else, until they realize they can't save themselves." The wind grew stronger, making the oil lamp sway. Jonas stood up and wedged more sacks against the door. When he turned, he saw Clara crouched, her arms wrapped around the tin can. It was her only shield, he realized. He sat down beside her. "Clara, do you believe your husband is innocent?" She looked up, her eyes both determined and sad. "I not only believe, I know. He was a good man. His death made me understand one thing in a place where the law is written with prejudice. The good people are the easiest to condemn." Jonas mused. "It's the same in the West. Here, they don't need proof, just hearsay. I was rumored to have killed someone because I survived the plague and others died." Clara was surprised. "You never told me." "No one asked, and I don't want to explain." They looked at each other. In the midst of the storm, there was no distance. Two people who had once run away now sat together in the old stable, sharing each other's warmth. The storm outside seemed smaller than the storm raging within them. At night, the snow fell so thickly that the door was blocked. Jonas threw more wood into the small stove, and the flames lit up their faces. Clara leaned against the wall, exhausted. He covered her with a blanket and sat beside her. "You're not sleeping, no. I'm used to waking when the wind changes direction. It's a sign." "What sign that when the storm passes, everything will be different?" She smiled weakly. "You sound like Pastor Amos. Maybe I could learn a thing or two from him, even though I never go to church. Maybe God likes the silent man more than the man who asks too much." Jonas bowed his head slightly at the words. He thought of his wife, of his lost child. He had not spoken their names for years. Now, here with this woman. He felt that the pain was no longer an abyss, but a path that had led him to this day. Near midnight, Clara fell asleep. Jonas watched her sleep, her face softened by the firelight. He gently pulled the blanket over her shoulders, then leaned his head against the wall. outside. The wind still howled, but for a moment he felt a sense of peace, a fragile peace that he knew would not last, but enough to make him believe he was not quite dead inside. The next morning, a pale white light filtered through the cracks in the planks. The storm had subsided. The world lay 3 feet deep under the snow, completely silent. Clara opened her eyes and saw Jonas making coffee in the old black pot. "Were you up all night? I took a nap." She took the cup, breathing in the steam. "I dreamed about Thomas. He told me to tell the truth, even if no one believed me." Jonas was silent. He looked at her, his eyes stern but gentle. Maybe it wasn't just a dream. "Do you believe me, Jonas?" "I believe. Because I see no lies in your eyes?" She smiled slightly, but tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in someone who no longer believed in himself." Jonas stood up and looked out the window. The light reflected off the snow, making everything blindingly bright. "When the storm is over, the ground looks different," he said softly. "But underneath, it's the same old ground. People are the same, the surface changes, but the past remains under the snow. Are you afraid of my past?" He turned back, his gaze determined. "No. I'm just afraid I don't have the courage to go all the way with you." Clara was taken aback by the words. She wanted to reply, but her throat tightened. In Jonas's eyes, she saw a light she had not dared to dream of for a long time, faith. They opened the door and stepped out. There was a light breeze, and the sun was shining weakly through the clouds. The valley was a silvery light. Jonas turned and smiled, squinting his eyes. "Look, it's still beautiful, even though last night felt like the end of the world." Clara smiled back, "Maybe because we're still here." And as they walked together on the deep snow, no one spoke. The wind died down, only the sound of footsteps mixed with breath, leaving 2 long trails on the white road. The first trace of trust, fragile but real. 3 days after the storm, the snow melted slowly, like a sadness that had not yet subsided. Pale light shone on the ground, sparkling like broken gems. Jonas Whitaker's cabin was quiet again, but the quiet was not the same as before. It was warmer, with the breathing of 2 people, the clinking of teacups, and laughter that passed like a breeze. Clara Monroe hung her blanket out on the porch, the morning breeze blowing a few strands of hair around her neck. Jonas stood in the stable, watching. For the past few days, she'd been working like a real ranch hand. No longer timid, no longer hesitant. It seemed that after the storm, she'd left her fears behind. He suddenly realized he had gotten used to her figure, used to seeing her bend down to pour feed for the chickens, used to hearing her softly sing an old lullaby as she watered the flowers on the porch. So used to it that the thought of a morning without her made him feel strange. "What are you looking at?" she called. Jonas started. "Nothing. I just thought, the snow was beautiful this year." Clara laughed softly. "You sound like a mountain poet. Don't insult me." She laughed, a real laugh, rippling through the clear air. As the sun rose, Jonas prepared to go into town to buy salt and nails. Clara offered to come with him, but he hesitated. "Are you sure Copper Creek people are not easy on strangers?" She looked at him. "If I keep hiding, isn't that like accepting the accusation?" He fell silent. She was right, and he knew part of him wanted it too. Wanted them to see her, to understand that this woman didn't need pity, only respect. The road down to town was 10 miles long, covered with ice as smooth as glass. Clara sat beside him, her blue cloak touching his shoulders. The cold made her hands tremble slightly, and Jonas reached out to hold the reins, his voice low. "If the wind gets too strong, just say so." She answered softly, "I'm used to the wind. I'm just not used to having someone worry about me." He chuckled. "Just think of it as a new habit." At Copper Creek, the snow had melted away, revealing wet log paths, hammers, men calling, horses whinnying, but as they descended, the sounds died down. A few men stopped and looked back. Jonas could feel the heavy gaze on Clara, a gaze both critical and wary. He slowed down, placing his hand on her elbow, reassuring her. She held her head high and walked straight into Henderson's. The doorbell rang, and Mrs. Henderson looked up from her ledger. Her eyes were cold. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," Jonas said. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker. And this must be the woman who lives on your farm." Her voice was polite, but every word was sharp as a knife. Clara remained calm. "My name is Clara Monroe. I am helping Mr. Whitaker this winter." "Oh, helping Mrs." Henderson emphasized the word. "In this small town, they don't often let women help in a widower's house without gossip." The air thickened. Jonas looked straight at his mistress. If Copper Creek is going to live on rumors, I bet the snow hasn't been cold enough this year to keep people quiet. "Mrs.?" Henderson blushed and bent over her book. Jonas turned away, but Clara put a gentle hand on his arm, signaling him to stop. She said, her voice strangely calm, "Henderson, if people want to say something, let them say it. I've survived worse than rumors." The landlady looked up, about to reply, but her eyes, calm, deep, and steady, made her silent. Jonas paid, and the two of them walked out. When they had gone a few steps, Clara said softly, "You don't have to defend me. I'm used to it." He tightened his grip on the reins, his voice low. "You may be used to enduring, but I'm not used to seeing someone being insulted and keeping quiet." She smiled slightly. "So we're both learning new things." On the way back, they stopped by a stream. The water was clear, flowing slowly over a thin layer of ice. Clara sat down on a rock and watched the flow. "I used to think people were like water. Even if they were cut in half, they would find a way to mend themselves. But now I see that some wounds never heal." Jonas sat next to her and said in a low voice, "You know, I used to think people were like stone. They could endure anything. But it turns out that stone wears away when the wind blows long enough." She looked at him, a smile flickering through the cold. "Maybe we're not as tough as we think, and maybe we don't need to be." By the time they reached the ranch, it was late afternoon. The setting sun was pouring down on the snow, painting the valley a golden yellow. Jonas put the goods in storage, and Clara started the fire. But then the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. A man rode up, his face hidden by a leather bandana. When he stopped, Jonas recognized him. Wade Morrison, the eastern rancher, known for his temper and foul mouth. "I hear Mr. Whitaker has a new client." He smiled faintly. "Nice. Didn't expect you'd change your taste." Jonas clenched his fist, but Clara stepped forward. "What business do you have here, Mr. Morrison?" "Nothing, ma'am. Just wanted to remind your master that people in this part of the world don't like strangers, especially the kind who bring trouble from the east." His eyes glanced down at her hand where Thomas's old ring still glittered. a beautiful widow wandering. I pity you." Jonas stepped forward, his voice like steel. "Get off my land. Wade, aren't you afraid I'll tell this in the tavern? The whole town will believe you're harboring a fugitive. Go ahead, but remember, it's a long winter. The road out of Sage Hollow could be snowed over at any moment." Morrison narrowed his eyes, then smirked and turned his horse away. Only the sound of hooves mingled with the wind. Clara stood still, her face pale. Jonas put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let him scare you." "No, I'm just afraid you'll end up in trouble. Sometimes, protecting someone is a way to save yourself." Clara couldn't sleep that night. Morrison's words were still in her head. She knew he wasn't just joking. Those kind of people never forget debts of honor. But in the darkness, as she heard Jonas pacing the porch, checking every latch, her heart softened. For the first time in years, she wasn't running alone. She glanced out the window. The snow was falling lightly, the pale moonlight reflected on the vast white fields. In the silence, she could hear her heartbeat clearly. Slow, but sure. Perhaps peace is not a place without storms, but when you have someone willing to stand by your side in the middle of the storm. The next morning, the wind changed. The sky was so clear that you could see the distant mountains glittering with snow in the thin sunlight. Jonas Whitaker got up early, intending to go out to the field to check the broken fence, when he saw Clara Monroe standing on the porch, holding an envelope. The paper was yellowed, the border postmarked New Orleans. "The postman left it while you were asleep," she whispered. "For me. But I don't know who would know I was here." Jonas looked at the letter and nodded. "Do you want me here when you open it?" She was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Maybe I need a witness, even if only to my memory." She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, the handwriting slanted. The damp, old smell carried the scent of the distant South. Clara took a deep breath and read. Jonas listened to each word, her voice growing fainter with each line. "Clara, if you live, believe me, I betrayed no one. I was betrayed. The papers I kept were proof of their lies. Those who used black patients as test subjects for their so-called cure. I tried to stop them, but it was too late. They killed Josiah because he knew the truth. If you read this, do not return to New Orleans. They are still looking for you, and keep those papers safe, for they are the only hope for the forgotten souls. Bottom, signed Thomas Monroe." Clara dropped the paper, her face pale. Jonas stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, this letter." "He was alive," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "He was alive when he wrote this. Maybe he's still out there somewhere." Jonas was silent. Part of him was happy for her, but the other part felt his heart heavy. He had tried to keep his distance since she had stepped off the train that first day. But now, listening to her talk about her husband, he understood that there were some distances that could never be bridged. "Is there a date?" he asked. "No, but the postmark says June of last year. That's less than half a year. If so, Thomas could be somewhere on the road. We could find him." She looked at him, her eyes a mixture of hope and fear. "What do you think I should do?" He replied slowly. "I think you should know the truth, no matter how painful it is." She clutched the letter. "I've lost everything before. I don't know if I can afford to lose it again." Jonas looked at her for a long time. "If you want to go, I'll come with you." She turned away. No, you can't leave the farm. You have a life here. The farm is there. But if you go alone, you might not come back. You don't understand. Jonas, I've made too many people suffer because of me. No, Clara, you make people find their best. And I don't want to lose that. They were silent. Only the wind rustled through the pines. In the distance, a flock of black crows soared over the hillside. The sky was bright, but the air was heavy. That afternoon they went to town to send a telegram. Jonas left his horse waiting outside the post office. Inside, Clara wrote the address of an old friend in New Orleans she had mentioned. Her hand shook slightly, the letters blurred. As they left the door, they met the cold gaze of Wade Morrison, who was standing opposite, leaning against a lamppost. I hear there's good news from the South. Miss Monroe, he said, his voice absent-minded and tinged with sarcasm. Jonas stepped forward. Morrison, have you been spying on us? Not really. Nothing gets past my ears in this town. You might be getting your husband back, and I'm losing my friend. Clara stepped back, her face pale. Morrison stared at her. They say your husband was shot, and now you write letters. Maybe he was never dead, or was never as innocent as you say. Jonas clenched his fists so hard they stood out. Watch your mouth, Wade. Morrison sneered, turning his horse away. I only say what people think. Just wait. Whitaker. Word travels fast. Clara said nothing all the way home. When she got home, she sat quietly at the table, the lamp casting a yellow glow on the open letter. Jonas made coffee and set it before her. You don't have to believe him. Morrison lives by sowing doubt. No, he's right about one thing, she whispered. I really don't know if Thomas is innocent or not. I trusted him blindly, and now I'm afraid I'm about to face the opposite. Jonas sat down opposite. Clara, I don't know Thomas, but I know you. A man with such a kind heart can't love the wrong person. Maybe his greatest sin is wanting to make amends too late. She looked up. That's easy for you to say. Jonas, you never trusted anyone enough to lose yourself. You're wrong, Jonas said, his voice low. I believed my wife would live. I begged, pleaded, offered medicine, but she died in my arms. I never believed again until you got off that train. The words made Clara freeze. The air between them paused for a few seconds. Jonas stood slowly and walked to the window. I'm not saying this to confuse you. Just to let you know there are beliefs that don't need to be right or wrong. We hold on to them, because if we let them go, we'll have nothing left. Clara looked at his silhouette against the light, his broad shoulders, silent and steady as a mountain. A vague feeling welled up in her heart. Not quite love, not quite gratitude, but a peace she had not felt since she had fled the east. Outside, the wind carried the damp scent of melting snow. She whispered, If we hear from New Orleans tomorrow, will you promise not to let me go alone? Jonas turned and nodded slowly. You have my word. That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat at the table, the letter spread out before her. The lamplight illuminated Thomas's handwriting, the letters trembling in the darkness. At the bottom of the page, she noticed a small line in pencil, faint but clear, to Eli Carter, Copper Creek freighter. She held her breath. That guy was the one who had delivered Morrison's package last week. Clara jumped to her feet and walked out onto the porch, freezing. Jonas, who was chopping wood in the yard, looked up when he saw her. Jonas, the mailman, could be working for Morrison. He knows because this letter passed through his hands. Jonas frowned. Are you sure it says so? Morrison has been watching us all along. Jonas threw down the log and looked out at the distant mountains. Then he didn't just threaten with words. If he thinks the papers you have are valuable, he'll come back. She clenched the paper, her voice shaking. I brought you danger. No, Clara, Jonas replied, his eyes shining in the darkness. You did not bring danger. You only gave me something worth protecting. The wind blew coldly, but in the middle of the yard, where yellow light shone from the small window, two figures stood side by side. One had run away, the other had been alone. And for the first time, they were both looking towards the same thing, facing the truth, even if it could destroy everything. The morning in Sage Hollow was as misty as a breath. Clara Monroe woke earlier than usual. She didn't know why her heart felt heavy, only that something was coming. Thomas's letter lay untouched on the table. Jonas Whitaker had just led his horse out into the yard, the pale light illuminating his shoulders. Clara brought out the coffee, the bitter smell lingering in the cold air. You hardly slept last night. Jonas nodded. I heard something strange out in the woods. Maybe deer. Or maybe not. Do you think Morrison will come back? I can't tell. But I know he won't give up easily. They were both silent. The wind blew softly through the porch. The smell of old snow and ashes mixed together. Suddenly, in the distance, came the sound of horse hooves. The sound was steady, decisive, unhurried but purposeful. Jonas gestured for Clara to come inside, while he gripped the gun hanging by the door. A man appeared from the south, riding a jet-black horse. His long cloak was covered with dust, and his wide-brimmed hat was pulled low. As he approached, he stopped, his voice low and hoarse. "Excuse me, I am looking for Clara Monroe." Clara stepped out, her heart pounding. "I'm Clara Monroe. Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Hart, from New Orleans. I'm following Eli Carter's route." The name made Jonas wary. "Carter sent you?" "Not exactly," Samuel said, removing his gloves and holding out another envelope. "I brought this from a man named Thomas Monroe." Clara froze. Jonas saw her hand shake as she took the letter. The wax seal was still fresh. She opened it, her eyes scanning the lines, then swayed as if she had been lifted off the ground. Jonas caught her. He's alive," she whispered. "But he's being held somewhere near the Texas border. Samuel." "You know," Samuel nodded slowly. "I was the one who worked with him." Thomas discovered the plantation owner's secret. They were experimenting on slaves with drugs. He was chased, wounded, and then asked me to deliver this letter. It took me 2 months to track you down." Jonas stared at the man before him. "Why should I believe you?" Samuel replied calmly. "You don't have to believe me. But look at that handwriting, and ask her if anyone else knows how Thomas writes his wife's name." Clara looked at the letter. It was the same handwriting, slanted, soft, with a habit of lengthening the R at the end of lines. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He wants me to come. He wants me to bring the papers he has. Jonas. I have to go." Jonas was silent for a long time. Then he said slowly, "If you go, you will be going through Morrison's land. And if he is really involved in this, he will not let you live to reach Texas." Clara turned around, her voice resolute. "Then I must go. I cannot live with this question unfinished." I need to know the truth." Samuel looked at them, then said, "I have horses and a road, but we must start now. The ice will melt in 2 days, and then the river will be flooded." Jonas looked out. The sky was gray, the wind damp with a hint of melting. "If you go, I will go with you." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but met his gaze hard, wordless. She stopped, nodding slightly. They prepared all morning. Jonas brought a pistol, rations, 2 thick blankets, and some cash. Clara carefully wrapped the papers in a tin box. Samuel waited outside, silent, his gaze deep as if he had seen too much suffering. When everything was ready, Jonas said, "It's at least a 5-day ride from here to the Texas border. We'll go around the southern valley, away from the main road." Samuel nodded. "One thing I'm not sure, Morrison is alone. He has his men at Copper Creek." Clara gently grabbed Jonas's shirt. "If you come with me, I won't be afraid," he replied softly. "I'm not going because I'm brave. Clara, I'm going because I can't stay when you're alone." They left Sage Hollow in the afternoon. A light rain fell, and the snow melted slowly, turning to mud that stuck to the horses' hooves. They skirted the pine woods, the hooves bouncing softly off the rocks. No one spoke much. There was only the sound of the wind and the thick smell of pine resin. At nightfall, they stopped by a stream. Samuel lit a fire. Jonas divided the rations. Clara sat quietly, watching the flames. "Samuel," she asked, "where did you last see Thomas?" "Near the Louisiana border," Samuel said. "He was wounded, but conscious. He said he had to leave evidence for someone he trusted. He mentioned you and a man named Whitaker. He said, if you ever see him, tell him that saving lives sometimes begins with silence." Jonas looked up slightly. He said that yes. "I don't understand what he means, but perhaps you do." Jonas was silent. He had heard those words from his ex-wife before she died. Sometimes you save someone not by saying them, but by staying. Perhaps Thomas had known her, or had heard them somewhere. That night, while Samuel was on watch, Jonas and Clara sat side by the fire. She said softly, "You see, my life is a never-ending circle. No matter how far I go, I always come back to the same pain." Jonas replied softly, "There are circles not to imprison us, but to remind us that there is a way back." She turned, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Do you think I can go back?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe not to where I came from, but maybe to myself." A gust of wind blew by. The embers flew high, glowing brightly before disappearing. In that moment, they both felt a fragile peace between them, like the calm before another storm. Early in the morning, they set off again, Samuel in the lead, Jonas behind. As they passed a narrow slope, Clara looked back. Far down in the valley, a black smoke rose like a signal light. Jonas saw it too. He pulled on the reins, his eyes narrowing. Not loggers. Smoke signals the trail. Morrison knows we're coming. Clara clenched her hands on the reins, her heart cold. Samuel turned back, his voice short. "We have to turn west, cross the Bison River before dark." Jonas nodded. "If they follow, I will hold them off. You two go on." Clara protested. "We went together. We will return together." Jonas looked at her for a long time. "I promise, I will not leave you. But if anything happens, you must continue. Do not stop, no matter what sound you hear behind you." She wanted to say something, but it was too late. Samuel urged his horse on. The road west was long and treacherous. covered in mist. Jonas looked back. The shadow on the distant hill was still moving. Vultures circled overhead, signaling the approaching hunting season, and in his heart, a premonition was clear. This journey would change everything. Not just Clara's fate, but the rest of his own. The sun was setting in the west, its golden light melting over the remaining snow. Jonas Whitaker rode at the head of the group, his gray hair blowing back in the wind. Behind him was Clara Monroe, clutching the tin can tightly in her coat, and Samuel Hart followed, his eyes scanning the forest. No one spoke. The sound of the horses' hooves mingled with the wind, creating a tense but steady rhythm. They had been traveling for 2 days, stopping only at nightfall. To the west lay a clearing where the Bison River wound around the Rocky Mountains. If they could get across the river before Morrison caught up, they could reach the border trading post in a day. But Morrison, Jonas knew, was a relentless man. A man who had lost a land dispute with him, now had an excuse to take him down, this time with blood, not words. Before the sun went down, Samuel pointed toward the foot of the mountain. "We'll camp there, about half a mile from the river. We can hear the water from there, and if anyone comes near, we'll know." Jonas nodded. "I'll go ahead and scout the way." Clara started to speak, but he was already urging his horse on. The wind whistled through the pines, and loose snow flew in its wake. As he disappeared, she tightened her grip on the reins, feeling a strange sensation, both anxious and reassured, as if any road was possible as long as he was ahead. About an hour later, Jonas returned. There are no fresh horse tracks, but there are old ashes. Someone must have passed here 3 or 4 days ago. Samuel narrowed his eyes. "Not a trader. Traders don't travel this way during the flood season," Jonas replied softly. "I know. That's why we should leave early." They built a small fire under the dry trees, keeping the smoke out of the air. Clara made coffee in a small pot, the heat mingling with the smell of damp earth. Jonas sat opposite, the firelight illuminating his face, making the lines around his eyes more pronounced. He looked older than his years, but his gaze was as bright, warm, and calm as the west. "Do you think we can cross tonight?" she asked. "If the water is low, maybe, but we have to wait for the moon to rise. The light will help us navigate." Samuel interrupted. "If Morrison is behind, he will choose to attack after dark. I was a soldier. I know the type of man." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then we have no choice." Clara looked at the 2 men before her. 2 different people, but both had the eyes of people who had lived between life and death. She realized that their calmness did not come from indifference, but from having seen too many things that could not be saved. Night fell. A crescent moon rose over the mountains, illuminating the distant Bison River. The water lapped against the bank like a sigh. They put out the fire and prepared the horses. Samuel led the way down the slope, Jonas in the middle, Clara behind. The grass was wet and muddy, and every step was heavy. When they reached the riverbank, the water was dark and swift. "We can't wait for morning," Jonas said. "If it gets warmer, the ice will melt and the water will rise." Clara nodded, though her heart was trembling. She had never crossed a river at night before. Jonas held out his hand to her. "Hold on. Stay close behind me. Don't let go of the reins." They began to walk down the river. The river was cold, splashing around the horses' hooves. Clara leaned close to Jonas, her eyes wide as she watched the moonlight reflected in the water. Every time the horse slipped, Her heart ached. Samuel followed behind, gun ready, eyes scanning the area. Midstream. Suddenly, there was a noise from the other bank horses. Low yells and a flickering fire. Jonas hissed, "Damn it! They came first." Samuel drew his gun and fired a warning shot. The sound echoed through the woods. Morrison responded with a hoarse laugh that echoed across the river. "Whitaker, I didn't think you were stupid enough to walk right into a trap." Jonas shouted, down, and pulled Clara to the right. A bullet grazed the water, sending a flash of light. The horse neighed, slipped, and cold water splashed up. Clara almost fell, but Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding both reins. "Go on, Jonas," Samuel shouted. "I'll hold them off." "No. Hart, go on, before she freezes to death." Before he could reply, Jonas spurred his horse. Clara clung to him, spraying water like rain. Samuel turned and fired 2 more shots. A dark figure on the other side fell, but the shots returned, loud and clear, flashing across the bank. Samuel screamed, then stopped. Jonas pulled his horse up the western bank. Once he was safe, he turned back to look for Samuel. He saw only darkness and the sound of rushing water. "Hart," he called. There was no answer. Clara trembled, tears welling in her eyes. Jonas held her hand. "We can't go back. Morrison will be here soon." They tied the horses and continued across the low-lying fields. The wind was cold and her clothes were soaked. Clara bit her lip until it bled, but she did not cry out. When they reached higher ground, Jonas stopped and made a makeshift shelter out of blankets. His hands shook slightly as he lit a fire. She sat beside him, silent. After a while, she said softly, "Do you think Samuel is still alive?" Jonas replied softly, "I want to believe he is. But even if he isn't, he did what he believed was right." She looked at the fire. Her voice choked. "I am tired of the price of trust. Jonas, every time I trust someone, I lose a part of myself." He was silent, then said slowly, "Trust doesn't take away from you, Clara. It gives it back. It just hurts." The firelight reflected off his face. She saw his dark brown eyes, deep and sad, but warm. She instinctively put her hand on his. Jonas tugged, but did not pull away. The warmth between their hands was transmitted, fragile but real. After a long while, she softly said, "If I don't come back, will you promise to keep this box of documents safe?" He replied immediately, "If you don't come back, I don't need to keep it. Why? Because I will go find you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, but her mouth smiled. For a moment, there was no more gunfire, no more darkness, just 2 people silently sharing their breath in the cold wind. That night, Jonas did not sleep. He sat looking at the fire, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat mingling with the distant echoes of the river. Part of him knew that Samuel was dead, but another part of him still wanted to believe that someone had survived. Because faith, like love, sometimes exists only because one dares to believe. As dawn broke, they continued on. The mist was white, the fields wide open. Jonas turned to look back at the river behind him, where Samuel had fallen. He whispered, almost to himself, "One can only truly overcome when one leaves behind what one fears most to lose." Clara listened, but said nothing. She just held his hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the faint light of day was shining down, revealing the final stretch of road where the truth awaited. 2 days after crossing the Bison River, the Texas landscape unfolded before them like a dry canvas. The wind blew across the prairie, carrying sand and the rusty smell of barbed wire. The southern sun was not as gentle as in Montana, but fierce, burning every thought. Jonas Whitaker and Clara Monroe slowed, their horses tired, but their eyes were steady. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from the wind. Jonas looked at the compass on his wrist. "According to Samuel's directions, it's a day's walk to the town of Rio Loma. There's someone Thomas knows there." She fell silent, her hand lightly touching the tin box hidden in her shirt. Each step was a pulsing rhythm between fear and hope. After all she had lost, she didn't know if she had the strength to believe. But she kept walking because not walking meant letting fear consume her. In the afternoon, they saw a small farmhouse by the road. A man stood in front of the door, stooped, with a long beard, holding a wooden stick. Jonas stepped forward and took off his hat. "Hello, sir. We are on our way to Rio Loma. Could you please get some water and feed for the horses?" The man nodded, his eyes wary. "It is not safe to go this way. There have been ambushes on the road lately. You two should stop for the night." Clara looked around. The scene was quiet. Only the sound of cicadas chirping in the fading sunlight could be heard. She nodded in agreement. Jonas put the horse back, and the old man led them into the house. The space was poor but clean. The smell of dry wood and wood smoke mingled. "Are you alone?" Jonas asked. "Yes. My name is Caleb Turner. I used to be an army medic. Now I only treat people around here. But strangely," he lowered his voice, "a few weeks ago a badly wounded man was brought to my house. He had papers and a bullet wound in his shoulder. His name was Thomas Monroe." "Do you know that name?" Clara jerked, her lips trembling slightly. "What did you say, he's alive?" Caleb looked at her closely. "Yes, but not here anymore. After he woke up, he left with two strangers, saying he needed to find someone named Clara." Jonas gently took her hand, his voice low. "Which way did he go, sir? West? To Elkhorn, a mine in town? But I must say he was not well. His wounds were not healed, and his mind seemed confused. He talked a lot about a conspiracy, about papers that could get people killed." Clara was silent. Jonas saw the familiar fear in her eyes, not of loss, but of finding. The old man continued. "Before he left me something. He said that if someone named Clara came, he was to give it back." Caleb opened an old drawer and took out a small leather bag. Clara opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of two young people standing by a large oak tree. The man in the photo had a gentle smile and bright eyes. It was Thomas. But what made her choke was the words written on the back. "If you read this, please forgive me for what I didn't dare say." She clutched the photograph, tears falling silently. Jonas turned away, not wanting her to see the pain in his eyes. Caleb looked at them and said slowly, "If you want to see him, you must leave now. Elkhorn is a day's journey, but the people there are not hospitable, especially to colored people." Clara nodded slightly. "Thank you. I am used to the coldness of the world." Jonas looked at her, his eyes softening. "But you are not alone now." That night, they stayed at Caleb's house, outside. The desert wind howled, and sand swept across the wooden roof like a whisper of the past. Clara lay in the dark, listening to Jonas's breathing in the next room. She didn't know if she was looking for an old love or running away from a new one. All she knew was that every time she thought of Thomas, her heart felt heavy, and every time she thought of Jonas, Her heart trembled. The next morning, before leaving, Caleb handed Jonas a small bottle. Painkillers. If she sees her husband again, she might need them. Heartbreaks don't heal easily. Boy, Jonas took them. The old man's eyes telling him something deeper than words, as if someone who had seen 100 heartbreaks knew that love and salvation sometimes didn't belong to the same person. They left the camp in the mist. The road to Elkhorn ran across open prairie, where the ground cracked and the wind whipped up dust. At midday, as the sun was high in the sky, they saw the town in silhouette, a row of faded wooden houses, a saloon, and a faded American flag waving lazily. Jonas tightened his grip on the reins. Here comes Elkhorn. Clara looked around, both hopeful and anxious. If Thomas were here, do you think he would recognize me? Jonas smiled slightly, but there was something like a wound in his eyes. Perhaps, though people change, the eyes that recognize old love never do. They stopped in front of a small inn marked Silver Mule Inn. The proprietor, a brown-skinned woman with curly hair and piercing eyes, stepped out. "How can I help you?" Jonas said. "We're looking for a man named Thomas Monroe. Was he here before?" The woman frowned. "Thomas Monroe? Oh, yes, he's at the end of the hall on the second floor." "But you're late." Clara was silent. "Late? What do you mean?" "He left 3 days ago. There were 2 men with him, one tall and thin, one short, carrying guns. They said Mr. Monroe needed protection. I didn't believe him. He seemed nervous, but he went anyway." Jonas asked, "Do you know where they went?" The woman sighed. "I heard it was towards the border, probably towards Brown Pass. But hey," she looked at Clara, "if you're the one he's talking about, be careful. There's something wrong with him." Clara thanked him, but her eyes were sad. As they left the inn, Jonas asked softly, "Are you sure you want to continue? Maybe Thomas has been forced, or worse, changed." She paused, looking away down the path. "Jonas, I'm not going to get my love back. I'm going to see what I believe. If Thomas has sold his soul to sin, I need to see it with my own eyes before I can let go." Jonas was silent. He understood that some journeys only end when the heart is returned to its rightful place, even if that place is no longer filled with love, but with peace. As they left Elkhorn, they passed a small cemetery on the edge of town. Clara stopped, looking at the tilted headstones. One read, "Samuel Hart, died with honor." She was stunned, then bowed her head and whispered, "You kept your promise, Samuel." Jonas stood beside her, silent, his hand on her shoulder. A fine rain began to fall. The drops smelled of iron and earth. Jonas said softly, "Let's get to Brown Pass before dark. Then, whatever happens, we'll face it together." She turned to look at him. "You don't need to do this." "No," he said, his voice soft and firm. "I do." And they continued on, the rain on their shoulders, the road ahead blurred in the damp mist. Their silhouettes blended into the red Texas soil. 2 people searching for the truth, but accidentally finding each other. On Tuesday afternoon, they reached Brown Pass. The road to the top wound between 2 steep cliffs, narrow enough for 2 horses to walk side by side. The sky was gray, and the wind blew from the south, carrying the scent of thunder. Jonas Whitaker stopped and bent down to examine the hoof prints on the ground. "Someone passed here this morning. 3 horses, one dragging his hind leg. It must have been Thomas." Clara Monroe looked in the direction he pointed, her heart aching. Every sign seemed to point her toward the man she had loved and the man who had ruined her life. Jonas tightened his saddle and held out his hand. "We have to get up before the rain comes. Once we get past the pass, there's the old ranger station. We can stay there for the night." Her horse whinnied softly, hesitating before the slope. Jonas went ahead, turning his head and saying, "Don't look down the cliff. Just look at me." She nodded slightly. The path up was slippery. Gravel rolled under the horse's hooves. The wind howled. Dark clouds weighed heavily in the sky, and flashes of lightning illuminated Jonas's face. Calm, determined. But there was something unsaid in his eyes. As they neared the summit, a shot rang out. The bullet grazed the rock next to Jonas, leaving a trail of white dust. He pulled Clara aside and shouted, "Get down." From the other side of the mountain, 3 figures appeared. One of them was wearing a gray coat and was limping. Clara held her breath. It was Thomas Monroe. "Thomas," she cried out. The man stopped and turned. Even from a distance, Jonas could see the shock and exhaustion on his face, but only for a moment. Thomas raised his hand, signaling his companions to stop shooting. The wind blew his shirt open, revealing the bandage on his left shoulder. Jonas pulled Clara down behind the rock. "Careful, we don't know how many there are." "No," she said, her voice choked. "He won't shoot. Thomas would never do that." Jonas looked into her eyes, seeing both blind faith and a faint glimmer of hope. He took a deep breath, stepped slowly out from behind the rock, and raised his hands. "We don't mean to fight. We just want to talk." Thomas took a few steps forward, gun still in hand. "Who are you, Jonas Whitaker? I'm with Mrs. Monroe. She's here to see you." The man paused. His shoulders shook slightly when he heard the name Monroe. Then his eyes fell on the woman walking behind Jonas. Her hair tousled in the wind. Her eyes filled with tears. "Clara," he said hoarsely. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Amidst the thunder and the smell of damp earth, 2 people who had once dreamed of the future together now stood just a few steps apart. But between them was an abyss of time and deception. Clara stepped forward, trembling. "You're alive. Why didn't you write again?" Thomas bowed his head. "You were being hunted. They knew you had the evidence. You didn't dare contact me, afraid of putting me in danger. But you've left me living like a dead person for the past 3 years. She choked. "You knew I would come looking for you." Thomas looked at her, his eyes a mixture of pain and mystery. "Clara, I am not the man you once knew. I did something you cannot forgive." Jonas sensed the tension in the air and took a step forward. "Thomas, if you really care about her, tell the truth." Thomas glanced at Jonas, a tired smile appearing on his face. "Who are you in this story? Her new savior?" Jonas replied calmly, "I'm just the one who won't let her suffer any more loss." Thomas was silent for a long moment, then lowered his gun. "Come with me. I'll tell you everything, but not here." They followed him to the old ranger station halfway up the pass, a dilapidated wooden house that groaned through the cracks in the planks. In the corner was an old wooden chest. Thomas opened it and took out a sheaf of papers and a small notebook. "These are the documents I stole before I escaped. They prove that the New Orleans businessmen were using sick black people to test their drugs. When I tried to stop them, they killed Josiah and tried to kill me too. I escaped, but," he paused, his voice dropping, "in exchange for my life, I gave them the originals. I kept only this useless copy." Clara looked at him, her voice trembling. "You betrayed them, Thomas. The people you swore to protect." He closed his eyes. "I had no choice. They captured me, tortured me, threatened to kill you. I chose to let them believe I surrendered, just so I could have a chance to tell them." Jonas, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "And the two men who were with you. Who were they?" Thomas replied heavily. "They're men. They followed you to make sure you didn't run away." As soon as he finished speaking, a gunshot rang out outside the door. Jonas spun around and pushed Clara to the ground, the bullet hitting the wooden post. Two dark figures rushed in. Thomas returned fire, the sound echoing throughout the small house. One of the men fell, but the other shot Thomas in the shoulder. Jonas rushed forward, wrestled the living man to the ground, snatched the gun from him, and slammed him down. He collapsed on the spot. The only sound above the pouring rain was the three men's labored breathing. Clara crawled to Thomas. Blood was seeping from his shoulder, staining his shirt. "Thomas, you're hurt." He tried to smile, his lips turning blue, this time for good. "Clara." She shook him. "Don't say that." Jonas quickly tore off his shirt and bandaged the wound. "Keep pressure here. He's lost a lot of blood." Thomas took Clara's hand. "You have to listen to me. The originals are in the trunk. I lied to them. The papers could save lives. But don't let them fall into Morrison's hands. He's one of them. He's here for them." Clara was stunned. Jonas tightened his grip on the bandages, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll take them to federal court. You'll live to see it." Thomas shook his head slightly. "No. Jonas, you know, when people make mistakes, sometimes only death can redeem them." Clara sobbed, pressing her forehead to his hand. "I came halfway across the country to find you, just to hear this goodbye." Thomas looked at her deeply. "You didn't come looking for love, Clara. You came looking for the truth, and I am that truth." He gasped, closing his eyes. Outside, thunder boomed. Jonas put his hand to his neck, and then there was silence. The silence was heavier than the wind. Clara sat motionless, her tears mixing with the rain that seeped through the leaky roof and onto her drenched dress. Jonas silently pulled the blanket over Thomas. No words could fill the emptiness. After a moment, Jonas turned to her, his voice hoarse. "We have to leave. Morrison will be here." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the man lying still on the floor. "I used to think that when we met again, I would be forgiven, but now I feel empty." Jonas gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Forgiveness is not a gift from others, Clara. It is something you earn yourself on your way through life." She looked up, looking at him through her tears. The light from the lightning flashed on his face, cold yet warm, strong yet gentle. And in that moment, she realized, love doesn't always come from the people we wait for, but sometimes from the people who have silently waited for us all along the way. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the cabin, amid the loss and grief, something was changing silently but surely. Clara stood up, clutching the box of documents Thomas had left behind. Jonas nodded, then walked with her out into the rain, where lightning lit up the sky. The rain had stopped by the time Jonas Whitaker and Clara Monroe reached the bottom of Brown Pass. The ground was wet, and the smell of mud and sap filled the air. Behind them, the ruined ranger station was lost in the mist, a thin trail of smoke rising slowly into the gray sky. Thomas Monroe lay there at the top of the pass, In the storm he had feared all his life. Jonas buried him with the chapped hands of a man who had buried his wife. Without a word of prayer, but placed on the grave an old photograph where Thomas and Clara had smiled by the oak tree. Clara sat silently, watching the ragged clouds drift by. Her face was pale, but her eyes were strangely bright. As Jonas tightened the horse's halter, she whispered, "He once said that if I were free in death, he would consider it the last thing he had done right." Jonas looked at her, not answering. He only nodded. Deep down, he knew that there were people who could only love by letting go, and Thomas, with all his faults, had loved that way. They started back north. The road cut through parched land, the sky clearing, save for a faint rainbow in the distance. Jonas rode in the lead, Clara beside him. The wind blew the cloth around her neck, revealing a thin scar below her ear, a small wound from their days on the run. Jonas caught a glimpse, then looked away, afraid he would stare too long. When they reached the Montana border, they stopped at a small inn on the Red Rock River. The innkeeper, an older woman with a warm southern accent, asked, "Where are you two going in the middle of the flood season?" Clara answered softly, "Home." The woman smiled kindly. "Good. Anyone with a home to go back to is lucky at this time of year." In the small room, the firelight cast long shadows on the floor. Clara sat near the window, holding Thomas's notebook. She read and reread the words inside, his notes about the experiment, the forgotten names, and finally, the last line. "If anyone reads this, please let justice do the rest for me." She looked at Jonas. "I'll take these papers to the federal courthouse. I owe him that." Jonas nodded. "I'll come with you. Not for Thomas, but for you." She smiled slightly, a weak but genuine smile. "You don't have to carry this burden." "No," he said, his voice low. "I don't carry a burden. Clara, I'm going because I found what I thought was dead." She looked up. Their eyes met in silence. There was no confession, but the sincerity in that look was enough. 3 weeks later, they arrived in Helena, the capital of Montana Territory. The federal courthouse stood in the middle of a large square, its walls made of sturdy gray stone. Clara entered, carrying a tin box. A gray-haired official took it and examined it, then nodded. "These documents are valuable. If what you say is true, we will reopen the file on the New Orleans experiment." Clara replied softly, "I just want the dead to be called by their names." When she left the building, the sun was shining brightly. Jonas waited on the steps, 2 cups of hot coffee in his hands. She walked over, flashing a rare smile. "You know, I used to be afraid of the sun. It made everything I lost clearer. But today, it felt warm." Jonas handed her the coffee. "Maybe because today you left your fear on the mountain." She laughed, a hoarse but clear laugh. "And you? Did you leave anything behind?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "I left my loneliness." That afternoon they rode out of Helena toward the Copper Creek Valley where it all began. The journey back was not as arduous as before. The prairies were green, the fields were blooming with wildflowers. The smell of new grass filled the air. Clara looked at the landscape and felt a sense of peace she had never known. As dusk fell, they stopped by the stream, where the last rays of sunlight filtered through the willows. Jonas lit the fire, and Clara sat beside him, her hair flowing softly in the wind. "Jonas," she whispered, "have you ever thought that you might be born again?" He smiled. Yes, only this time. You don't have to leave anywhere. You just have to dare to stay. She looked at him for a long time. In the sunset, his face was tanned, his eyes deep and peaceful like an autumn lake. A man who had lost everything, but could still love again, quietly, patiently, and sincerely. As night fell, they sat close together by the fire. Clara told him about her childhood in the East, about the piano in the church, about her mother, who had said, "My daughter, don't let fear keep you silent." Jonas listened, not interrupting, just nodding, sometimes smiling. When the fire died down, she turned around and said softly, "Jonas, if you want me to leave tomorrow, I will. I don't want to be another wound in your life." He looked at her, his voice hoarse and low. "Clara, you are not a wound. You are the remaining part that makes me know I am still alive." She hiccuped softly, then laid her head on his shoulder. Outside, insects chirped. The wind blew through the grass, making a gentle melody. In that moment, all the pain, loss, and obsession vanished. All that remained were two lonely souls, now finding each other under the vast western sky. The next morning, as the sun rose, Jonas led the horse out. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her hair down, her face flushed in the early morning light. He turned and looked at her for a long time. "Copper Creek still has a vacant house. If you want, you can stay." She smiled and asked softly, "What are you doing there, replanting the flower garden, and teaching the children in town to read and write? I heard you were a teacher." She laughed, her voice like a spring breeze. "You remember well. There are things you can't forget," he said. Clara stepped forward and touched his chest lightly. "Is there anything else you're afraid of forgetting?" Jonas leaned down and said softly, "Only this feeling." She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the pain of remembering the past, but only a warm, fuzzy future opening up. The sun rose high in the sky, illuminating the valley. Birds sang and the stream trickled at the foot of the hill. Clara took a deep breath, smelling the earth, the wind, and the warmth of the man standing beside her. She knew there might be more challenges ahead, but she had learned not to run away. As they rode toward Jonas's old farm, the red dirt road appeared in the early morning light, winding like a memory, but no longer heavy. Clara turned to look back. In the distance, the top of Brown Pass was covered in white clouds. She whispered, as if speaking to Thomas's spirit, "Rest in peace. I have found what you were looking for." Jonas couldn't hear clearly, but he sensed the peace in her voice. "Let's go home, Clara," he said softly, and the two figures disappeared into the dawn. Behind them, the vast west. Ahead, a new beginning. No promises, no noise, just the quiet belief that, despite all the storms, people can still find each other in the depths of loneliness. It was the first morning in years that Clara Monroe felt truly alive, and Jonas Whitaker, who was once afraid of love, knew that there were things that didn't need to be promised. Just going through them together was enough. The story of Jonas and Clara is more than just a love story. It is a journey of two people learning to move on from loss, to forgive the past, and to open their hearts to the good that lies ahead. In life, sometimes we cannot avoid loneliness, but it is in that loneliness that we realize who truly stays. Jonas teaches us that silence can be a way of loving deeply. Clara reminds us that no matter how many times a heart is broken, it still finds its way back to the light. And perhaps, when we are calm enough to look back, we will see no loss is meaningless if it makes us appreciate the person holding our hand today. Thank you for listening until the end. If you feel the warmth of the West and the belief in love still somewhere in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the Frontier Hearts channel so that each story from now on will be a fire to warm your heart.